Hi, Misha here, and Peanut and I. Say hi, Peanut. She's purring. She's sitting here. Anyway, looked at the Stormtrooper, the elite trooper, strike trooper, assault trooper, shock trooper of the Empire, part of the Imperial Army. However, today we're going to look at the Army trooper, or Army soldier, who fulfilled pretty much all the other roles. Technicians, medical staff, guards, just people working, doing things. But they also provided military and security, even doing more policing duties. And so we have 4 figures from the Black Series, all of which are pretty new figures. By the way, what you're hearing is Peanut kneading her paw on a gun case that I laid down to put my knees against, because this floor is not exactly soft. Anywho, we begin with the basic Army soldier, or in this case, Ganlin or so, but he can stand in because he's essentially just wearing a standard technician's, sometimes called as a boiler suit. It's just meant to be kind of a lightweight work type uniform. And in Imperial uniforms, even for most ranking officers, were intentionally designed to be kind of austere, more work, less play. They were not designed, even dress versions, to have medals and accommodations. They would, of course, have rank insignia. They would have cylinder code things for officers, but no, it was designed for duty and just more for practicality, although also to be kind of intentionally austere. This is all more or less from Palpatine, and it was actually thanks to Tarkin that they would get a little bit more elegance. But the Imperial Army started off as being drawn in from, conscripted from the Grand Army of the Republic that wasn't the clones, the other parts. There were plenty of members in the Clone Wars that were just, folks. And a lot of these came from local and private security agencies and planetary defense forces, regional defense forces. So you're drawing together a lot of military into one group. And of course, this would be folded into the Empire. Later on, after a few years, these would often be conscripts, 18, 19-year-olds who just go and sign up for the army. So they were young and easily molded, but they received less training and were put in the field much faster than, say, a stormtrooper would be. On the other hand, well, they at least got to show their faces. Like I said, the uniform is very basic, an optional cap, and yeah, the figure doesn't actually come with a cap, but I had a spare one, so figured I'd throw it on here. And the basic color was green, kind of an olive drab, or gray-green. The difference is sometimes attributed to different branches, also just production. And they could wear boots, but they could also wear shoes, regular pants. We'll actually talk about officers in a different video, but today we're just going to kind of cover privates, corporals, and NCOs. And a lot of these folks would just be working in installations or at desks or counters unarmed. But in case you needed to arm one of the first things they might go to pick up was another offering from Blaztech, the SE-14R. This is what we would think of as a PDW. It was pretty rapid fire, had a basic scope sighting. It could be handled two-handed, but really is meant for one hand. Kind of a large pistol or a small thing. Kind of reminds me of something the size of like the MP5K. As a general rule, though, when they're just working inside of places or on board Star Destroyers, if that's kind of their assignment, they would not necessarily have an armament. They would just have whatever gear they needed. But that's the basic army. And even though the stormtroopers kind of got all the glory and were at the tip of the spear, and there were efforts by some to kind of push them out the Army out in favor of the Stormtroopers, it never happened. And we haven't even got into the Navy yet. But they were a critical part, and you can see them throughout the original trilogy and into the newer stuff. If a need arose to go into the field, they could start to armor up. Again, this is one of the Andor figures, but in military army garb, so it'll work. And basically over the standard work uniform, note the pants on this one, you would put over some chest armor with a small supply pack in the back. Also, you could have some additional armor on the upper part of the arms, but you could still opt to keep a cap on, let's say if you were doing prisoner guard duty or whatever. And while this one does have a holstered SE-14R put in his hands, one of the weapons you don't really see in the hands of stormtroopers, but you do see various army troopers or army soldiers carrying from time to time. The SX-21 pump action scatter blaster. Yeah, it's a space shotgun. And like any space shotgun, it has quite a bit of power up close, but range is limited, and of course ammunition is limited. Why you would need a pump action electronic gun, I have no idea. They even made the pump movable on the piece. Okay. Anyway, definitely if you had something like this with limited ammo and range, you would want a backup gun. And so this is kind of someone, let's say, set up in a prisoner guarding or just, outpost guarding duty. That's what shotguns in the real world are quite good at. But with a little bit of chest armor and added supplies on the back. I think it's interesting that we see this with just over the standard boiler type uniform, boiler suit. And later on, when we get to the officers, we'll even see it thrown on over the typical officer's uniform. So it's kind of flexible. This shows kind of they're starting off as combat troops, but it goes from there. Andor, while a good show, did not make for the most interesting action figures. However, a couple that were very intriguing to me when they were announced were a couple of Imperial officers, and this is one of them here. And this is the one from Ferrex, and it's basically a subdivision of Army Trooper known as a Security Trooper. Crowd control and kind of herding cats. And he has the same kind of upper armor we looked at. He now has these shin-high protective steel-toed synthetic leather boots. And it's worth pointing out that a lot of the security uniforms were kind of in a black color. There were a few others that were black, but security enforcements did. He has the helmet with the open faceplate with removable goggles, which would definitely make sense if you're doing riot control. And I have him set up here in a non-lethal way with a riot shield, which you see him use, and then a baton, which isn't exactly the right one from Andor, but close enough for government work. And for keeping people back. The only thing is, I wish this figure did have a holster like the Andor one, so you could give him a pistol as a last resort. But oh well, I guess it wasn't technically in the scene. He originally came with a standard, so I can set him there, E11, which the Army did use some, although Stormtrooper Corps and others seem to get preferential treatment when these are coming in. This is the style without the glow rod and the shorter magazine, so kind of original series pattern, but the Army would use these, especially in the early days of the rebellion. But I think the kind of riot control version is pretty neat, and I like that it's just adding more armor and protection, and it really does show the versatility of the army uniform and the practicality over dress. Hashtag Palpatine got some things right. But we can further escalate with our final figure. Moving from Andor and Rogue One figures, we come to one from Solo. And honestly, this is one of my favorite Black Series figures. It's also one of only a few I own from the Solo film. It-II just didn't have a lot of figures that interested me. I like troopers, and it didn't have a ton. This is the Swamp Trooper, or sometimes called the Mud Trooper. And this is the fully kitted out combat version. Same armor, same leg protection. But now we have a breathing mask filtration system that could be used on worlds with less than great breathable juice on them. Also, one would imagine it would protect from gas attacks. And he comes with a waterproof cape, something we actually will see some officers carry as well. That's just to kind of keep stuff out of his backpack, resource pack, all that. And these were often the youngest recruits. In fact, they had a slightly different uniform jacket, and were usually pretty basic, pretty just into the thick of it. And that probably explains why they carried this, quite frankly, interesting looking, although not interesting to be issued weapon, the Blastech E10. Yeah, the E11 we've talked about. This is its immediate predecessor. And I don't think this was ever intended to be full adoption. It was kind of a stopgap, an interim measure, maybe the first effort to replace something like the DC-15A. It's a more full-size gun compared with the E11. Longer, heavier. Has a foregrip. And stock here. Don't know if that's meant to fold or not, but this one doesn't. It does have a glow rod on the side. So in theory, you'd think, well, it looks like it'd be more powerful, a little more long range. It's definitely configured more for outdoor planetary assaults, which, you know, Army makes sense. The problem is it had issues. It was known to be less reliable. It needed more maintenance. It was more sensitive to corrosion and grit and grime. It was just kind of a mediocre replacement for the older Clone War era guns, and it was quickly supplanted by newer versions. I should point out there was a variant that had an optic attached. It's probably one of the final production ones that also integrated some elements from the E11 to try to make it better. Keep in mind, Blastech made both. So, yeah, but I think it's a neat thing, and not many figures come with it. It's just nice to get a figure that doesn't come with your standard E11 or even an E11D. And that's what I think I liked about this figure, is he's pretty unique. The cape's removable. The mask is removable. The goggles are removable. Even the helmet's removable. And this would have been a trooper just sent in, not so much like a stormtrooper as a strike force, but more to subdue and fight a more sustained trench type warfare on the ground of a planet, kind of the Inglorious workaday stuff. And these are mostly conscript, low-ranking enlisted, or at least NCOs, and so they didn't always get the best, newest gear. I mean, even here with a mask and goggles and helmet, the face isn't completely enclosed, and while the body does have armor, it's not completely armored, so as vulnerable as a stormtrooper or a buckethead might be, these guys are even more so. But they would remain on a planet long after the stormtroopers would go away and could be conscripted from populations across the universe and trained quickly and put into service quickly, and there's something to be said for an empire trying to establish and maintain control across a very, very big galaxy. And there you have it. The less talked about, but equally important, Imperial Army. And even though the Stormtroopers were a part of it, and even though you could actually transition between the Army and Stormtrooper Corps and even back, and the officers would intermingle, these tended to get kind of the lower spot on the totem pole. So, yeah, whenever you thought the Stormtrooper was the lowest of the low, there you go. But I should also mention that the SE-14R was one of the few guns not made by Ballistic. It was actually made by Sun Mare munitions. But I like these. Then again, I've kind of always just kind of gone for trooper types and military types. But what do you think? Stormtroopers are classic, and these do definitely take inspiration from the original trilogy officers. But it makes sense that they were there, and I think because Rogue One and Andor were so well received, that gives them something. Now the question is, which group will we look at next, Miss Peanut? What do you think? That's a great idea. This is Misha and Peanut. We'll catch you very soon next time.